friends, and welcome to Little Giant Crafts. This is going to be the last of my introductory videos for beginners before I just get into normal crafting. So today, let's talk about paint. Now, I'll be honest, I am not a great painter. I would even hesitate to call myself a good painter. But what I am able to do is paint competently at what is usually called the tabletop standard. See, a lot of good painters, obviously, you see the figure up close and it looks amazing. Mine, say, take something like this, it doesn't look great up close. But when you're playing a game, you're not looking at it up close. You've got it on the table, usually like 3 to 4 feet away, so as long as it looks good from there, I'm happy. And painting miniatures as opposed to larger pieces like terrain or vehicles, it can be pretty intimidating. You know, they're very small, they've got lots of tiny little details, but really all I use is a few simple tricks that I think if you're a beginner will really help you. So without further ado, let's take a look. If you're going to be painting miniatures, my first suggestion is to expand your supplies. And the most important of these supplies is a primer. Now, a lot of miniature figures and different type of plastics don't really hold paint well. So if you were to try painting directly on them, it wouldn't really stick. It would flake off and it just wouldn't look good. So what you want to do is get a primer that will stick to the material and then paint will stick to the primer. I just use cans of Krylon. They come in a lot of different colors. I usually do sort of a gray because you don't want to do like black for something that's going to be really bright or white for something that's going to be really dark. I feel like gray is just a good medium that works well in most situations. Here's just an example of something that's primed and not yet painted. It was one of those decorative Halloween skeletons, some cardboard, some chains, bits of a figure, but priming it gives it all, an even surface for all the paint. The next thing you might want to invest in are better quality paints. Cheap acrylics can be good for terrain when there's not a lot of detail, but for smaller figures, it might not do the job as well. Personally, my favorite brand is Vallejo. Here's just a few that I have. I've got maybe 2 dozen total. But again, like I mentioned in the materials video, I did not get these all at once. Instead of the like cheap dollar bottles, these smaller ones cost like $4 to $5. So getting a lot of them can add up. So I just got a few colors to start with for the Space Marines I was painting. And then over time, when I was, painting something new, I would get a few here and there depending on what colors I needed. But these are good because you won't need to paint as many layers to get the same, coverage and vibrance of the color. The less paint you use is good because then it doesn't cover up all the details on the figure. Now, the next suggestion are better brushes. The main problem with cheaper brushes, well, there's two. One is that they don't last as long, which is fine because they're cheap. You can just, pick up another pack. But also they don't always have small enough points for whatever little detail you might be painting on a figure. So here's just a few I have. I don't even know the brand names off the top of my head, but they serve me pretty well. And if you do get nicer brushes, I recommend getting a brush cleaner. They just, help get the paint off the bristles and the brushes will last longer. It's really easy, you just get the brush wet and, lather it around a bit and then rinse it off. It works pretty well. And it helps the brush keep the shape. Another thing that a lot of people use is a holder. If you're holding a small figure, your hand might get cramped. So a lot of people use holders like the type here. Personally, I don't use holders that often, but what I've found makes a very good cheap holder is a pill bottle. Now, if you have this type of pill bottle, you can flip the cap over and then it just screws in and off like any normal lid. It doesn't have, you don't have to push it down like the little childproofing. Fun tidbit. So what I did is I took 6 bottles and I glued the caps onto this piece of MDF, which is just sort of like a cheap wood. and put blue tack on the tops of them. It's the type of material that you can use to stick posters to the wall, and then you can just pop the bottle off the base. Once you've got a figure on there, you've just got a nice little holder. You can paint it. If you're taking a break, you can put it back onto the cap, and this way you can be painting a few things at once. There are nicer options out there, but this works for me. Now, the first essential technique is to use something called a wash. Essentially, these are kind of like thinned down paints. Here we have a strong tone from the Army Painter. If you're going to get one, this is what I recommend starting off with. Although I did get a box set with all their different colors, and I actually cut this little thing off the box so I could remember what colors that it comes with. But basically what a wash does is it is a dark liquid that flows into all the cracks and crevices of your figure, bringing out the shaded areas. Here we see I'm applying a wash to this Imperial Guard figure, and it's just gonna get into all the cracks and really bring out the shadows. The one thing you want to keep in mind when using a wash is not to go too heavy. If you get it on some bits where you don't want it, you can wipe it off pretty easily before it dries. So just do a little at a time until it looks good. And you can always give multiple washes, but you don't want to sort of build up and cover all the detail, if that makes sense. Now, the good thing about having multiple washes is that you can use different colors depending on the situation. So I've got here this pink brain golem monster that I 3D printed, and I decided to use the red tone because, red and pink go well together. So here I'm putting it on, and you can already see all those little squiggly brain lines. They just pop so well. I give all my figures washes, but they're especially good for things with like little crevices like this. And again, you can see here, I put a little blob on and spread it out. You don't want it to stay that heavy. You want it to go lightly so it doesn't cover up the details you're trying to bring out. But I think strong tone works well. If you're only going to get one, that is what I would recommend. It's sort of a dark brown. It fits most situations. So here we can see a before and after on the guardsman, and what a difference it makes. It's usually called talent in a bottle because honestly, it improves the look of a figure so much. Now, the other most important technique is known as dry brushing. Whereas washes bring out the, darker recesses of a figure, dry brushing hits all the raised edges, the brighter spots. Now, unlike washes, which are their own product, dry brushing can be done with whatever paint you're using. What you want to do is get some paint on the brush, and then using a paper towel, you actually want to wipe most of it off. See, if you don't do this and you just have a brush covered in paint, you will paint the figure a solid color. But once you've wiped off most of the paint, then you just lightly bring the brush across what you're painting, and it catches all the raised details. So you can see on this piece I'm painting, the dry brushing is bringing out all the raised bits of the wood grain, and it's really just making the details pop in a way that you wouldn't see them as well if you didn't dry brush. So you can see here one that's dry brush and one that's not, and that's the only difference between the two. It makes such a difference. I'm also going to be using dry brushing on this brain golem again. I'm going with a lighter pink to, it sort of represents the lighter parts of the model, which I'll touch on shortly. But again, I'm just getting most of the paint off the brush and then just going very lightly, not even over the whole thing, just over the tops and bringing back some of the brighter color that was covered by the wash, but still leaving the wash in the recesses and just making a much nicer contrast. Now, my favorite use for dry brushing and what I what I use it the most for is my bases. I do a very simple technique for all my bases, both to save time and just so they match. Now, for all my figures, I glue sand to the base and then coat it in brown. Once that's dry, I dry brush with this lighter color. And it just brings out all the little bumps in the rocks and the sand. It's a subtle effect, but it really makes a difference. And here you can see the before and after, pure brown versus the brown with the dry brushing. It's a very simple technique, and it just looks, I don't know, it just looks so much better. You can really see the difference just from a simple dry brushing. The last technique I'm going to talk about is similar to dry brushing, and that is highlights. I mentioned hitting the lighter parts of the figure, the tops, and what I mean by that is you want to imagine where light would be hitting a figure. One really good way to do this is to look at it from the top down and pretend you're the sun. Anything you can see is anything the light will hit the best, and anything you can't see will be shaded because it's not hitting the light. Here you can see also I'm just shining a light down for example. You can see the head and shoulders are obviously the lightest because that's what the light is mostly hitting. So highlights are basically like dry brushing, but sort of in more precise areas. It's really more of an idea than an actual technique. So I'm just going to take an even lighter pink and just hit some of the little raised squiggles on the head and the shoulder to make it look a little brighter, because if that's where the light were hitting, it would be brighter. And highlights work really well with layering, going from your base color lighter, and then, go lighter but cover less, and then lighter and just a little bit less. And then just in the very middle of all these light pink highlights, I do a little bit of white for the absolute highest, brightest points on the model. Another place this works really well is on fabric. When you have folds like here on the soldiers, you can just do, a little line on the top of the fold. So here you can see before and after on the brain golem. Admittedly, the before picture was taken after the wash, but the after picture is with wash, dry brushing, and highlights. It just makes things feel a little more lifelike, and again, it doesn't look great up close. The colors could be a little cleaner. The pink doesn't match perfectly with the sort of like salmon-y pink of the body, but from far away, it just looks like, the sun's hitting the top, so it's a little lighter, a little more colorful. Here you can just see another example of highlighting on an older figure I painted, another 3D print. All these light tan lines on the scales and the light brown on the claws, those are all just little bits of highlighting. And again, up close, you can see it's, it doesn't follow the line perfectly. It's a little wavy and kind of uneven thickness in places, but from far away, you just get like, little hints of like the light bouncing off the claws. Like I said, I'm not a great painter, so if you want to follow some actual great painters and continue to improve your paint jobs even more, here are a few suggestions of very talented YouTubers and a few examples of their work. Duncan Rhodes, Lila Mev, the Mini Witch, and Miniac. And I'll have links to all their channels in the description below. That's it. If you've never painted miniatures before, I hope this has maybe inspired you to give it a try. The worst that happens is you mess up and you gotta paint it again, which is really, all things considered, not that bad. After this, look forward to some proper crafting. So, until next time, be creative, be kind, and take care of yourself.